In this learning objective, we're going to talk about the domain of logarithms. And just a quick reminder, the domain is the x values we can put in. So basically in this video, we're going to talk about what are we allowed to put into a logarithm function. And it's an interesting question because it ends up not being everything. There's only certain values that we can put into a logarithm function. All right, so a review of some of the things we've learned so far. All right, one of the things we learned about when we learn about rational functions is the domain of a rational function is everything but 0, right? Because I can't divide by 0, so I have to take 0 out of my domain. All right, in a bonus objective, we learned about the square root of x. All right, the square root of x, you can't put in negative numbers, so the domain is just the numbers that are bigger than or equal to 0. I can put in 0, but I can't put in any negative numbers. All right, so those are kind of the domains that have not been nice so far. Every other thing we've learned about, lines, quadratics, exponentials, you can just put in whatever you want. All right, so let's say we try to do this one. All right, negative numbers is a good place to start. Can I plug it in a negative number into my log? All right, well, if this was true, we could say it would be equal to some number. Let's just call it c. Again, nothing special about the letter I'm choosing. And if this equation was true, I could switch it to an exponential equation and get 2 to the c equals -1. So I'd have to find the exponent that I put on 2 and get -1. All right, you could try this forever, and it's actually never going to work. So there's no exponent I can put on 2 to get a negative number out. You might think, well, what if I do like 2 to the -1? I remember negative exponents just turn it into a fraction, so that doesn't turn it into a negative number. So there's no way to give an exponent to turn something into a negative number. So that tells me that this actually doesn't work. I can't put in negatives into a logarithm function. All right, so what's going to end up happening is the domain of a log function is all the positive numbers. I actually didn't mention it, but still, if you had 0, this isn't possible either. So you actually can't do 0 either. Right? You can't do negatives, and you can't do 0. All right, this is similar to the square root of x, whose domain is everything bigger than or equal to 0. All right, but notice with square roots, you can do 0, the equal sign's there. Logs, you can't. So logs, you can only put in positive numbers. You can't put in 0 or negative numbers. All right, so there's one thing you remember from this video. Just remember that if you have a log and there's some negative number in here, that's just not possible. All right, so that's the most important thing from this video to remember. All right, so now we're going to have slightly more complex log equation. You want to find the domain, but the important thing when you're dealing with a log is just remembering that whatever is inside the logarithm has to be positive, has to be bigger than 0. All right, so the general strategy for all these ones is take whatever is on the inside of the parentheses and set it bigger than 0. And now we just get this inequality we have to solve. So first thing, subtract 1 from both sides. And the next thing, divide by 3. All right, one thing you have to remember when you're dealing with inequalities is if you multiply or divide by a negative number, you have to flip it. But since I divided by +3, it stays the same direction. So the domain of this log is x has to be bigger than, strictly bigger than -1/3. If I try to plug in -2 or -5, it wouldn't work because you'd be plugging in negative into your log. Next one, same idea. I take whatever's inside the log. It doesn't matter what the base is. You just take whatever's in the parentheses, 5 minus x. And that is going into a log, so it has to be bigger than 0. There's multiple ways you could solve this one. I'll just do it this way. All right, subtract 5 from both sides. And I have to get rid of that negative in front of the x. I'm going to divide both sides by -1. And this is what I mentioned before. All right, the negatives are all going to cancel, but because I divided by a negative number, the inequality switches directions. So now instead of eating the left-hand side, it's going to eat the left-hand side or the right-hand side. And my final answer is the domain of this one is everything less than 5. All right, those are the only numbers I could plug in because it would guarantee that I plug a positive into my logarithm. All right, so here's one for you to try your own. All right, find the domain of log base 3 of x plus 6. And the answer you should get is that x is bigger than -6. Again, the basic idea, take whatever is inside the log, and that has to always be bigger than 0, strictly bigger than 0. In this case, to solve my inequality, I just subtract 6 from both sides. All right, so for this coding objective, you're going to do a skill check. That's going to have 2 questions, and you just got to find the domain of the log. So really what you have to remember is that there's going to be some log with some random base. Take whatever is in here and set it bigger than 0. And then just solve that inequality. You just have to do that twice. All right, but again, the most important thing to remember leaving this video is if you ever have a log with a negative number inside, just know that is not possible.